Now, Jori, you clearly have covered this team. You were out in Oxnard, and obviously there's certain things that we can get from Dallas, Texas, because some of the great reporters out there sending videos and stuff, and there's just certain things that we're never going to experience. What was your favorite part of this particular training camp for the Cowboys that you were able, whether it be like an interview, an opportunity to talk to somebody that just obviously did not show up in your reporting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say one thing that showed up in my reporting in part, but not in full, is I actually had the opportunity during training camp to have roughly an hour-long sit-down with defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, and that was so instructive because, I mean, I always say every Dan Quinn press conference I go into, I leave smarter than I got there, and I think we all do because of the way he educates, but just to get more of a sense of how he wants to lead this team, why he's back, like, I think when we hear so much about this could be a team that's looking like the defense is going to be stronger than the offense potentially, and the defense could be leading the way, and then you have the opportunity to really sit down with Dan Quinn and hear of him like writing up all these notebooks over the off season of if he's head coach again, what the vision for his next team is going to look like, and how he says, okay, here's a player that came in the building, here's what he's done before, here's what I think the vision for him will be, and now let's see how training camp in the preseason either aligns or disrupts that vision. That was really instructive to me and just amazing to see a little bit behind the curtain there.
Speaking of that defense, tomorrow we will be seeing this team cut down the roster to 53 individuals, and there's going to be some tough cuts, particularly on Dan Quinn's defense and on that defensive line. Where are you seeing some of the toughest roster cuts for this team and what this team will start to look like starting tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. Defensive line is tough. As Stephen Jones said today on radio, there's not necessarily the depth on offensive line, but there is depth on the defensive line, which is a great position to be in, but it's also one that means they're going to have to part with some guys. Now, whether that's through trade or just through cuts will be really interesting to see because you have so much talent, and then you have talent that's been here for a few years, and then a lot of defensive line talent that they've drafted in the few years. I mean, when you look at 2021 and we're going Oso Odighizuwa, Chauncey Golston, Quentin Bohanna, and then this year you've got Sam Williams in the second and John Ridgway in the fifth. I mean, how much more do you keep? And do you have one of those more veterans who's been around the block that you want to try and trade? Do you have, I mean, even someone like, and again, I think the Cowboys really like him, but even like a Neville Gallimore who got here in 2020 and has been really talented, has had a good camp, but maybe wasn't someone that Dan Quinn picked, then how do you decide, well, what if a team's got a great offensive lineman for the Cowboys who really need that right now? How do you make that decision? So I would say defensive line will be a tough one. The secondary is pretty deep too, especially by Cowboys standards, whereas I think positions like receiver and offensive line, they will be buying more so than selling.
Jori, we're talking to Jori Epstein of USA Today. Jori, with this Cowboys team, you said you sat down with Dan Quinn, which was instructive. I've really been interested in what's behind the facade for Kellen Moore. What this offense looks like this coming season is going to be really interesting to me, and I was really intrigued by kind of some of the West Coast principles that filtered into the team late last season. Have you gotten any idea, and I know they don't show a line in the offseason, but have you gotten any idea as to maybe what this offense could possibly look like in this upcoming season?
Yeah, again, this is such a boring answer in some ways, but it's so true. They need to figure out that offensive line, because if they can't figure out the offensive line, it doesn't really matter what you want to do on offense, in my opinion. Like, we saw the second half of last season when the offensive line was off, like, they could not run the ball. And if they can't run the ball, the whole, run sets up the pass and vice versa. I think also, okay, if you don't have Tyron and instead you have a rookie like Tyler Smith, who I think has the potential to be a great left tackle in the league, but isn't necessarily going to be that week one when he's never played, much less practice in training camp at left tackle. Do you need to get the ball out more quickly? How much are you using guys like Zeke and Dalton Schultz for extra blocking, and is that taking away some of their opportunities? I am really excited to see what Dak and CD can do. I know one thing that was interesting is, I think it was on the Fan, right, that Amari Cooper came on and was talking about how, apologies if it was on a different station, but Amari Cooper came on and was talking about how Kellen didn't feature him basically. He's like, if Kellen features CD, that will be great. And I asked Kellen about that. I'm like, do you think you're going to feature CD? Like last year you were really like, aggressively take what the defense gives us. And I do think that will be really telling whether CD actually becomes the receiver one that he should be or not. And again, I think it's hard on the outside to say, okay, maybe CD is the first read on 5 plays and only 2 of them is he the read that actually gets it. So there's a little bit of nuance here, but that's what I'm going to be most looking for is how much is CD featured.
Jori Epstein of USA Today covering the Dallas Cowboys joining us right here on the Get Right with Reggie KG on 105.3 The Fan. Speaking of that offense, you've covered Dak Prescott for quite some time now. I have a very unique relationship with him. Going into year 7, Jori, when you look at this player and what he's being asked to do within this offense, is this the kind of player that you can see who can elevate not only his play, but the group around him to really put him possibly in that upper echelon category of the other guys that we talk about as being some of the best in the NFL?
Yeah, I think you nailed the framing there, guys, because Dak could actually play significantly better individually this year and the offense not go as far and the playoff wins not come, which is obviously Dak and the Cowboys' main goal, because he's being asked to do so much more when he doesn't have the offensive line looking out for him. He doesn't have the receiving core he had last year. I do think that when it comes to elevating guys around you, there's the physical aspect and the intangibles, and I think he's got all the intangibles to lead. I mean, we hear that from so many guys across the team, and even a couple days ago, I was talking to Will Grier about that, and he was really saying, like, that is something so unique relative to all the quarterbacks he's seen when he's traveled across teams in this league. So I do think Dak will elevate everyone around him. I think and I think he'll do it in a way that's really different because finally he had a healthy offseason. He's got a little more stability than he did the last 2 years. The question is, if you're elevating, but you're starting at such a lower level, is that elevation going to be enough? And I think that if they don't make a move at offensive line, I don't know that it will be.
Jori, I should do the responsible thing and ask you the follow-up, which is, that move at offensive line. However, you triggered the Will Grier portion of this, and I'm fascinated with that dude. And I might just be doing a lot because he seems to be a dude who just enjoys chucking the football, and I'm assigning a whole bunch of other characteristics to him. Can you give me a little bit of a quick picture of, like, what that dude's character is? Like, what is that guy like, Will Grier?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked because I loved our interview with him last week. And not only did I love our interview with Will Grier, but we talked to Jake Ferguson, their rookie tight end, right beforehand. And Jake was talking with us about Will. And I was like, wow, this is a story I'm going to write. And I told my bosses, I'm like, I'm going to write this sort of like, could he be the backup quarterback? And my bosses were like, wait, do you think that's possible? And I'm like, look, Cooper Rush definitely has reason to be the favorite, but I don't think Will Grier is out of contention here. And so much of it really comes down to what Jake told us, which is Will Grier has this swagger and he's got this energy that his teammates say lifts everyone around him. I mean, he's kind of got this, okay, I was at Florida, then I was at West Virginia. Now I've traveled around the league. I didn't really get the best opportunity to succeed in Carolina. Now I'm here. What can I do? And like, one of the things I'm sure y'all saw David Hellman tweeting off campus, like he wasn't afraid to sling it in training camp.
That's right.
And I think there's something to be said for that of like, okay, Cooper Rush is reliable. He won a Sunday night football game at the Minnesota Vikings last year, and you cannot downplay what that means and the way that he led the game-winning drive and the touchdown to Amari Cooper. That said, do you want that sort of like reliable but hasn't shown an extremely high ceiling in the NFL yet? Or do you want someone who seems to like have this really high risk reward both sides? So that's something the Cowboys will have to decide. I think that they'd love to have all three of them in some form or fashion. It would also be interesting to me, like, do you think Cooper Rush is more likely to get back to your practice squad than Will Grier? And if so, do you keep Will Grier on the 53-man? But, I mean, it's not going to be nearly as surprising as, like, a Dan Bailey move if Will Grier is their backup quarterback. But I do think that, like, something like that's going to happen tomorrow, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was that backup quarterback.
All right, so enough of the football questions. We got one last question with you before we get you out of here. And this is a question I'm going to be posing throughout the night and later on in our show, okay?
Okay.
What's an adult problem no one prepared you for, Jori?
An adult problem no one prepared me for. Okay, this is my most recent one that I've encountered.
Okay.
So I left town this weekend for a couple days, and I parked my car at DSW. And, like, I always take a picture of the parking garage, but for this time, for some reason, I took it of like the staircase nearest where I parked, not the actual. And apparently brilliant Jori over here decided to take it one floor up. So I spent 27 minutes in the In the depths of the DFW parking garages yesterday before I finally found my car. Also adult problem related. This is like classic me that I can like write stories, but the little things in my life I cannot ever keep straight. I also haven't replaced the battery on my key, so I couldn't even try and listen for it. So I was just sort of like strolling the garage of DFW parking garage last night and trying to figure out where my car was, if it was there, what floor it was on. I was like, I knew it was at Terminal A, so that was a good start. I thought it was generally within 15 gates. But yeah, that was half an hour. I'm never getting back.
Oh man, just stop by the auto parts store. Let's fix that thing up for you.
I'm sure they could get the battery for you.
My favorite part of this story was the fact that you used the very particular 27 minutes, which is how I know you were looking at your clock in that moment. So you really put me in that place.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, if it's 30 minutes here, like, it's not happening. But like, no, let me tell you, there's a lot going on last night, and I'm like, I wasn't really stressed. Like, I'm like, this is my self-imposed problem, and we're going to fix it. But like, it was so unnecessary. I just need to take a picture right when I park. So for anyone listening, if you park at the airport or really anywhere else, just take a picture of your spot, drop a pin, do something.
Yeah, you can always delete the picture later. Yeah, it doesn't do anything.
Right. I mean, I have a picture. It's just not a helpful one.
All right, so I've taken this a little bit further than I need to. However, I'm very intrigued by this entire situation. We're going to probe further. Like, about what time period did you start thinking of alternatives, and what were those alternatives? Like, what was the plan of action once you realized I'm not finding it as easy as I should?
Yeah, so I definitely thankfully, my flight landed at Terminal A, which was where my flight took off from. So that was great. I was thrilled. Thank you, American Airlines. But then I went all the way from like A1, where I landed, to A39 or whatever the last one is, to where it was done parking, and like I still wasn't finding it. And then I kind of recircled back to 15 or so gates. And then I just got to the point where I'm like, I just don't think I missed it, because like I found some other Camrys, and I'm like, nope, this has like a personalized license plate that says Daisy on it. That's not my name, and I don't know a personalized license
That's
plate.
fair.
There's another one that was like a handicap license plate, which thank God that doesn't apply to me either, and I've never forged that. So I'm like, okay, there are some pretty non-identifying factors for these cars. So finally I called my dad. I'm like, look, I'm an adult. I can do this stuff by myself, but I know you've done this a lot of times. What would you do? And I was like, what are some of the things you've done? And then he was like, did you check the other floors? How long would it take you to check another floor? And I'm like, not that long. So I went down to floor 1, and despite the fact that the picture I took was from floor 2, I apparently took a picture on a floor I didn't park on. And then I was very excited to find the car.
That's brilliant. I
think that you can eventually go to the airport and have them like drive you around, which also I'm like, I'd rather walk. Like if I'm I might as well get my steps in if I lost my car, you know?
Well, when she's not looking for her car, you can catch her writing for USA Today, covering the Dallas Cowboys. She is one of the very best in the business. You can find her on Twitter at Jori Epstein. She is Jori Epstein. Jori, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin and Reggie. I'll talk to y'all soon.